Several days ago, Bandai Namco demonstrated a piece of gameplay from Elden Ring. I watched the whole stream and in general, judging by the number of likes under the video, you can fairly say that it was a success. But some viewers and players noticed that the graphics looks too familiar. And I have to say that in Elden Ring you can clearly see distinctive features of From Software Studio, such as peculiar points of fixing your progress, aka bonfires, and healing mechanics, but also including a stylistic choice, work with light, and flowing hair and fabric. Demon's Souls for PlayStation 5 was released almost a year ago at this point, and it wasn't too crazy to assume that From Software's new game would come close to the graphics level of Demon's Souls. Yes, that remake wasn't created by From Software. This was a work of Bluepoint Games that is responsible for other well-done ports and remakes, and their implementation of Demon's Souls is an outstanding job, considering that under its cover the remake consists of almost the same source code as the original game on PlayStation 3. But nevertheless, Elden Ring doesn't look worse than previous games of From Software. But as it seems to me, the main problem was not the graphics but the animations. And I understand the concern of such players. Some animations were taken straight from Dark Souls 3, for example. Some people called Elden Ring Dark Souls 3.5 or Dark Souls with a horse. But is it really so bad when animations and some elements wander from game to game? Spoiler, not really, but we'll look at this with examples. However, in the case of Elden Ring, there is a slight nuance. How do you think? Should the upcoming God of War Ragnarok, which takes place in the same setting as the previous game, suddenly turn into a visual novel with elements of a card game? I think that every adequate person will say no. It would be more reasonable to develop ideas and concepts that were created in the previous part. For the context, I should tell you that I played all God of War games, including games for PSP. The only one I didn't play was that Java game that was released on mobile phones, but I didn't miss anything significant. But it's fair to say that the games before that soft reboot were different. It was a purebred slasher, the basics of gameplay and the approach to which did not change over the course of 6 games: Ascension, God of War 1, 2 and 3, and 2 PSP games. I mean, from game to game, even the basic combinations of Blades of Chaos didn't change. Yes, each game offered different types of additional weapons, but the basic concept regarding the hero's appearance, his behavior, camera position and basic attack combinations did not change from part to part. Yes, when a significant amount of time passes between games, you can forget some of the mechanics and even miss them. But when you go through these games in a row, you manage to get a little tired of the same repetition. And to tell you the truth, if God of War 2018 kept working with the mechanics of previous games and didn't become the game it turned out to be, I would probably never buy and play it because I simply got tired of the same gameplay in 6 previous games. What I especially like is that in every game about the God of War, we're given a plot rationale for why we upgrade the character, his abilities and skills over and over again. Unlike Devil May Cry, for example, throughout all of the games playing for Dante, we're forced to upgrade the same actions which are already familiar with over and over again, like double jumps, stinger and high time. But again, despite the fact that Dante's sword and his ebony and ivory pistols are at the heart of the gameplay, with each part the gameplay deepens not only with the addition of new heroes, but also with the addition of new weapons. More than that, every character differs in his own way of fighting. For example, in Devil May Cry 5, Dante goes the path of perfection and depth of gameplay due to the variety of weapons. Nero, on the other hand, is more focused on the perfection of control and timings. For example, did you know that Nero can perform his Exceed and make a hit with his wing at the same time? But to perform such a combo, you should master your timings perfectly. V was made in general in a very peculiar way, but taking into account such a summoner who calls upon familiars, the gameplay for him could turn out to be many times worse than it turned out in the end. What I'm trying to say is that with enough new content, the repetitive elements are not that obvious, especially if a lot of time has passed between releases. Let's take a look at From Software's works, starting with Demon's Souls, and list some of the main mechanics that have framed their work. The absence of difficulty levels and, as a rule, pretty high overall difficulty level is present in every game. I'm not talking about that super race of people who go through all Dark Souls without a single hit on a bongo, blindfolded in zero gravity. I'm talking mostly about ordinary players now. Conditional fixing points of progress, aka bonfires, are present in all games, just with different names. The backstab mechanic is present in all games as well. A character that will help in upgrading abilities is present in all games except Dark Souls 1. Healing through a vessel is present in all games except for Demon Souls and Bloodborne, where consumable items exist for these purposes. The loss of souls and the ability to pick them up at the place of death is in all games except for Sekiro, where half of the available experience and money is cut. And in all games, except for Demon Souls and Sekiro, there is no coherent plot, but it is replaced by a deep study of lore. As you can see, the creators simply shuffle various mechanics, and somewhere they deepen them, somewhere they are finalized, something is completely removed. And on the example of other games, we realize that the use of even identical assets and mechanics in general is a common thing for studios, especially within the framework of, if not the series, but one genre. So if everything is fine and dandy, what are the complaints about Elden Ring? The problem is this: while Demon Souls and Dark Souls are quite similar in terms of mechanics and setting, Bloodborne and Sekiro feel like completely different games. If you put the gameplay of Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3 side by side, you will probably think that these games have some relation to each other. But if you put Bloodborne and Sekiro next to them, you will realize that these are completely different games, at least in terms of setting, taking into account that some of the assets can also be seen in Dark Souls 3 from Bloodborne. Therefore, when the player hears Elden Ring, something that is not Dark Souls, this player imagines something at the level of Sekiro or Bloodborne, and when he sees repetitive animations from the already existing game in the same genre and similar setting, dissonance occurs. I mean, it looks like the new game seems to be trying to convince me that it is anything but the old game. It seems to me that no living soul would mind if the game was called Dark Souls 4, even though From Software said at one time that Dark Souls 3 would be the last part of the series. But I may be wrong. After all, Hidetaka Miyazaki and his vision have changed templates more than once. After all, if From Software showed a radically new game, they would risk being misunderstood. Once my photography teacher gave this example. Russian and Ukrainian languages are quite similar. If a Russian takes a Ukrainian newspaper, he will most likely understand most of what is written there, but he will entertain himself with new interesting words that also may sound funny to him. Once again, he will be entertained. But if a Russian takes, say, a Japanese newspaper, he will not understand anything at all, since he will not even be sure where to start reading. In several interviews, Hidetaka Miyazaki said, "The gameplay is not so far from Dark Souls. That doesn't mean that the gameplay will be identical, but you can say that Elden Ring belongs to the same genre." Instead, Miyazaki has described Elden Ring as a natural evolution of the Soul series, adding new features such as a large open world and new gameplay mechanics including richer customization, horseback riding, and a stealth system similar to Miyazaki's Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. For example, a banal jump completely changed the way of playing Sekiro. Yes, to some extent, there were jumps in the previous games as well, but I just can't turn my head to call it an adequate jump. I admit, I am in anticipation of this game, even despite the possible roughness, and I sincerely want to believe that this is not just Dark Souls 3 with a horse. And thank you for your attention. Like this video if you liked the video and would like more such analysis. Do not let similar animations deceive you, and see you in the next video.
I offer you an accord.